Why does relationship satisfaction drop for both partners after having children?
Can we sit at a table together, look each other in the eyes and saying, how can we change this? This is not working anymore.
Why, even when dads are doing more than our fathers ever did, does it still feel like it's not enough?
When we talk about gender equality, when we talk about a new masculinity, we often have the feeling that we're talking about giving men and boys less space. And I wanted to do the opposite with this book.
What do we believe the job of a mum is? What do we believe the job of a dad is? Can ideas around masculinity actually help me as a father, or are they things I should be fighting against? Where did these ideas come from?
This idea that if you're really masculine, you're not supposed to show your heart is very much entrenched in the kind of culture that we consumed as kids.
And what happens to our relationships when we try to live up to ideals that were never designed for the lives we're living now? In this podcast, I talk to authors, academics, sociologists, gender experts, and parenting experts to understand what's really happening to couples after they have children and find out if there is a way to be a happier parent. Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls has sold over 10 million copies worldwide. The author, Francesca Cavallo, says she used to get irritated when people asked her, well, what about boys? We talk about why she changed her mind and why she wrote a book that encourages boys to explore their inner worlds. We talk about her beautiful stories and their challenge to traditional heroism. We talk about the power of storytelling to encourage mutual liberation for men and women. And most importantly, what noise pirates make in Italian. You write this incredibly successful book, okay? Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls. And this is women from history, girls from history, and women who are alive now. And they are stories of courage and resilience and fighting hard to do what people believe in, fighting against the odds. And then you've got this other book, Stellar Stories for Boys of the Future, and it couldn't be more different in terms of structure, right? It's set on other planets, it's sci-fi, it's fantasy, it's fairy tale. Like, why did you come to that creative decision that these books needed to be so different?
When Rebel Girls came out, of course, there were a number of copycats that basically followed in the steps of Rebel Girls. So there was a couple of years where there were lots of books. There were like 100 stories about this, 100 stories about that, about philosophy, and one of those books that replicated the formula of Rebel Girls was a book for boys that basically told stories of, I think it was called For Boys Who Dare to Be Different or something along those lines. And it was a perfect replica of Rebel Girls because it was stories of Barack Obama and the Dalai Lama and Martin Luther King. So great men who were, very wise in many cases and very successful at doing beautiful things for humanity and for the world. And when I saw that book, I thought that was not what I thought was needed in the field. Like if I had to create an equivalent of the cultural gesture of Rebel Girls for boys, I did not believe that would cut it. The reason is that Rebel Girls made sense because the stories that girls learned about in that book had been erased from history. So many girls would never learn about these scientists, these musicians, these politicians, because they had been erased from textbooks. Many people told me when they met me, I learned about this beautiful story in your book and I had no idea.
Can I just jump in there as someone who did ancient history at university? Hatshepsut, the first female Pharaoh.
Pharaoh.
Like
Yeah.
before Cleopatra, I was, wow, like how shameful that I didn't know
Yes.
about that, you know? It's like, whoa. Sorry, go on.
And yeah, no. But of course, men's stories don't have the same problem because men's stories have been and the, an idea of masculinity has been built on exceptionalism, right? So I didn't feel that was filling a gap in the common understanding of masculinity. I felt there was something different that was needed. So I felt basically that we're girls needed to be inspired to discover, to explore the world through the stories of other women who had overcome obstacles and had taken their life in their hands and had been brave enough to defy the cultural expectations of women. Boys didn't need to be encouraged to an outside world exploration because we were already doing that. We were already telling boys that aspiring to be exceptional is a good thing, right? What we needed was inspire boys to explore their inner worlds. And in order to explore your inner world, you need fiction. So my idea was the space within us is by definition boundless. And this is why I set these stories in outer space, because I wanted everyone to feel that if we're talking about a new way of understanding masculinity, we are not restricting the space that we're offering boys, because this is a common misunderstanding. When we talk about gender equality, when we talk about a new masculinity, we often have the feeling that we're talking about giving men and boys less space. And I wanted to do the opposite with this book. I wanted to tell everybody that the space that we have to gain is boundless, that we cannot even imagine it for how vast it is. And we must muster the courage to be pioneers and to discover a new way of being into the world that doesn't need domination. So when I was working at Rebel Girls, I owned, it was, 2016, 2017, T-shirts, "The future is female," were everywhere. And I didn't question that sentence. It made me feel galvanized and energized, just like the next feminist, all right? And then when my nephew was born, and I, I looked at that T-shirt with a different feeling, with a different sentiment, because I was like, well, if the future is female, where does that leave my nephew? Because whenever I'm a queer woman and in a lesbian relationship, and in Italy, for example, we don't have marriage equality, right? And when people tell me that I must be patient because some things take time, I always say, well, but I don't live in the time of history. I live in the time of my life. So if I cannot have kids, now I'm 42, I may never have kids in this one lifetime I got. So I realized when my first nephew was born that I was asking my nephew to live in the time of history. I had this expectation to tell men and boys, because men and boys before you have had a dominant position, now you must stand back and you must wait, because we must take the power, and you must wait on the sidelines that we shape what the world is going to be like.
I guess maybe to come back to that, people would be like, well, people have been asking women to do that for ages.
Yeah, and that's not a good reason. Because
Right.
if we want to overcome the patriarchy, we are talking about overcoming a system that is based on domination. We must be ambitious. Just replacing the group in power, assuming that we could do that, which I don't think we can, because it's not that easy. It's not overcoming the patriarchy. It's just building a 2.0 version of the patriarchy.
Yeah, it's
So
putting women in charge of a patriarchal system.
Yeah, which I think this is a losing game in any case. So I don't think that is feasible, because at a game that is rooted in domination, I honestly don't think that we can actually succeed in taking the power. So I believe that we must make the patriarchy obsolete, that we shouldn't punch the patriarchy, that we should just make it obsolete. So that is a bit what I'm trying to do with this book, and why I insist on this exploration of other worlds that we still haven't built yet.
So yeah, I sent you this a very famous science fiction book called The Left Hand of Darkness by female writer, American writer Ursula Le Guin. It's brilliant. On this other planet, there is no real gender, and humans have seasons of reproduction, and in those seasons they can become male or female in terms of being able to give birth. And it's an exploration of what that does to a society. And in the introduction to that book, she says, science fiction and fantasy is the most philosophical genre because of everything you're saying. Like, it allows us to ask this question: what if there were a world where? And run with that question. So you create this setup of 12 different planets. You get to make your own rules. I love this idea of, for ages we've been telling boys about the hero's journey, which is a journey outwards. It's a leaving behind of a normality and a going out on an exploration. And you're finding a way to make this journey inwards. What were the ideas that you wanted to prod and poke at and move around, like, in your planets?
What I did was I said, okay, I don't want to copy my own book, Rebel Girls, but what I can do is I can replicate the process that led me to the creation of Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls, and I can see where that leads me. So, because when I worked on Rebel Girls, I got started from fairy tales, from analyzing traditional fairy tales. I went back to traditional fairy tales. So, with Rebel Girls, what I had done was I was looking at fairy tales to understand how culturally we had seeded this idea of the subalternity of women. Because fairy tales are like the fossils of human culture. If a person who is not a geologist looks at a fossil, they will say, wow, it's a rock, right? But then if a geologist looks at the same rock, they will be able to see layer by layer the history of our planet in one single rock. Fairy tales are the equivalent of that for human culture, because in fairy tales we condense the most meaningful messages that we believe are crucial for new generations of humans to have a sense of what is expected of them in the world and what they can expect from the world. And we condense that in very simple, apparently simple stories, all right? So with Rebel Girls, the analysis was, well, all of these princesses that must wait around to be saved by a prince don't encourage girls to go out and dream that they can make their own destiny. I had never looked back then at what boys learn from the same stories. Because, you see, whereas Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, Rapunzel, they are all different characters, Prince Charming is always the same because he is not a character. He is a narrative function, which means that for every girl who learns that she must wait to be saved by a prince, there is a boy who learns that he's either saving a princess or he doesn't have a reason to be in the story, which is pretty deep. And if you think, Prince Charming doesn't have merchandising because he's not a character. He only serves the purpose of keeping the integrity of the kingdom and making the princess happy. This message really hit me hard because it felt like a pretty brutal message. And the other thing that I realized analyzing fairy tales was that in traditional fairy tales, we are almost never shown the inner life of male characters. Take the father of Snow White, for example. The poor guy, he loses his wife. He marries an evil woman who tells him to kill his only daughter. And what do we know about what this man feels? Absolutely nothing. In traditional fairy tales that have been, that have become very big also thanks to Disney, the three characters that actually have that we are shown their inner life are the Beast in Beauty and the Beast, the Hunchback of Notre Dame, and Aladdin. Now, these three characters are very interesting because the Beast lives outside of his town, far away in a castle, far away from people's eyes, because nobody can see his pain. In fact, his servants have been turned into objects.
He's a misanthrope, right? Or a malcontent. He's like this classic outsider.
It's not clear if he's a misanthrope or if it's the community that doesn't want him around.
An exile.
Because he has these aspects that is disgusting to other humans. Then we have the Hunchback of Notre Dame, and he lives in the Notre Dame bell tower, and he only speaks to gargoyles. And then we have Aladdin, and this is very common in Disney. The only Disney male characters that show their inner life are portrayed as exotic. So we have Aladdin, we have in the Aristocats, I don't remember the name of the cat, the romantic cat. In the Italian version, it's called Romeo, but I'm not sure in English. In English, it's an Irish cat.
Oh, okay.
So it has that exotic element.
Yeah.
So he can speak his heart.
Wildness.
Yes. He can speak his heart because he's not white. Entirely white, at least. Okay. So this idea that masculinity, real masculinity, is not supposed to show that if you're really masculine, you're not supposed to show your heart, is very much entrenched in the kind of culture that we consumed as kids. And the ripple effect of this is very visible in the culture of superheroes, because superheroes are basically heroes that must save others because they are not capable of saving themselves. And this means that just like we told women that they are not capable of taking care of their material needs, we've told men that they are not capable of taking care of their emotional needs. So the trap at the foundation of the patriarchal system is that men and women are in this lock where women must provide men with emotional safety, and men must provide women with material safety. In the moment when we have started to say, guess what, men? We can provide for our own material safety. I believe we have not fully realized how tectonic a shift this was in the way human societies work together. Because we have not realized that if men have built their identity, because these are the models that we have hardwired into them ever since they were kids, into the ability of being providers, then if I take that away from you, where does that leave you? If you have the tools, if you had the opportunity to build a different source of safety in your life, then you're more equipped to manage this transition. But if you don't, you feel like you're falling through the cracks. And of course, we never blame. I mean, it's different to blame society. We always blame the people that are easier to blame. And I think this explains the kind of crisis we are seeing and the difficulties to communicate between young women and young men.
Because if I don't rescue you, if I don't protect you, then I'm not in the story.
Yeah.
There's nothing else to me. I'm incredibly two-dimensional. And what was amazing for me, actually, completely circumstantial, as I was reading Stellar Stories for Boys of the Future, I was also reading the recent Booker Prize winner, Flesh, which is all about masculinity. And in that book, if guys who are listening, spoiler alert, but it's very good, read it anyway. But the character ticks all the boxes. Okay, he's tough. Other men fear him. He's desirable to women. He's very brave in the military. He saves people. He gets enormous wealth. He has a son, and he doesn't have a single friendship. He is unable to express love. He has his inner world is desolate. Like he doesn't have the language. And despite achieving all these things, the last line of the book is, after that, he lived alone. And it just, as I was reading this, I'm thinking of what Ruth Whitman said in the afterword to your book, which is, under patriarchy, boys and men get all the things except the things that are really important.
Yeah, it's I always say that we should all rewatch Fight Club, because that movie was really, and the book was really ahead of its time, because it really shows this inner fracture that is at the origins of a certain idea of masculinity. The stories, the performative side is the side that everybody wants, that everybody gives words to. And the other side is considered like a loser. One of my favorite parts in that movie is when the character tries to dismantle what the character interpreted by Brad Pitt has built. And people don't want
It's Edward
that
Norton,
version.
isn't it?
Even within feminist online discourse, for example, it's as if we're only willing to see the kind of men that fit the hegemonic masculinity kind of model. The other men, we are not willing to look at them. And what I am trying to argue is that we must start to give space to those men that are, in my opinion, the vast majority, who do not live their masculinity as hegemonic, who are actually trying to, live with their family, that are trying to orient their life to meaning, that are in a deeper dialogue with themselves than we acknowledge. But the problem is that we are used as a culture to only put on a pedestal, even for good or for bad, only the men who live this version of masculinity. And we give them way more space than they actually have in society.
Yeah, there's something that the therapist Terry Real said recently, which I think is connected to what you're talking about, where basically he was saying there's no healthy middle for masculinity. I'm either a winner and I'm on top and I did it and then I'm entitled and I can do whatever I want, or I'm a loser and I'm unlovable and then there's kind of no space in the middle for anything other than this kind of win or lose. Like, where does that fragility come from around masculinity?
I think this is particularly true for American masculinity. I don't believe this is necessarily true for Europe as well. And even in the United States, I feel like in the 60s, in the 70s, this idea of a family man as an honorable man was very popular. So you didn't need to be a winner at all cost. You could be a perfectly good family man, honorable because you took care of your family, you were a good husband and tried to be a good father. It's part of this idea that I actually believe is false, that this kind of masculinity, a winner takes all, is traditional.
Okay.
I don't believe it is. I think this is this is a function of the extreme polarization of wealth that we are seeing right now on YouTube. The representation of young men that drive fast cars and they're dating models. It is so on the nose. If you look at icons like, for example, I don't know, Sean Connery, right? And compare the golden era of Sean Connery as 007 and that kind of model. Yes, 007 drove fast cars, but it was very clear that it was a fictional character. One of the things that makes the current situation a bit more troublesome is that instead these characters that are hosting YouTube shows and are influencers in the manosphere are actually portraying their life not through the lens of fiction, but as if their lives were perfectly attainable. And this is a problem. The other part of this is that even a mildly the mild version of the manosphere that is embodied by Scott Galloway, for example. Even if you read his last book, Notes on Being a Man, you see that, for example, he says things like he's proud of his wife working, but he says you should still pay. If you can afford it, you should still pay when you go out to dinner, etc. And when he says this, I don't think he realizes that he's turning having a wife who works into the ultimate flex. Because if you have a wife that works and you can also afford to keep on paying for everything, it basically means that you make so much money that you don't need two people working in your family, right? So this is not a relationship that is based on equality. It is still a relationship that is very, very traditional, and you are using the fact that your wife is working as the ultimate flex of the progressive man. I think we have a lot of these problems.
I also think it denies, because it's uncomfortable, and it's still uncomfortable within masculinity, it avoids me saying, I need my wife's income, right?
Yeah.
And that actually the fact that I'm sat here talking to you now because I ran a business with my wife, and that business after COVID never really recovered. And there was a point where I was like, right, this isn't going to pay two salaries. I'd started doing this work and doing talks, and she was like, do you know what? What you're doing is really important. I'm going to go and get a different job and make a salary. So now I'm able to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Now I have versatility because we as a couple haven't clung to a dynamic of it being finding that incredibly awkward or thinking that it's better that I'm the one who's paying for dinner. And I just think men like need to admit that that is a good thing. It's a good, the family man of this United States that you were talking about, he still had one job. Mm-hmm. Which was that paycheck. Do you know what I mean? Everything else was secondary. And for me, what your book did was it offered versatility to my boys. Yeah. It was like, you don't have to save people to be loved. You don't have to dominate to be worthy. You can still be brave and courageous and resilient. And you can also ask for help. Yeah, like these were the things, and it's so, like the reason the book's so good. There's lots of reasons the book's so good, but it never bangs you over the head with anything. Do you know what I mean? It shows, it doesn't tell. I want to move on to the stories, but can you just talk to me about what you found with the David Gilmour work?
Sure. Well,
Not the guitarist from Pink Floyd. Sorry, just to be
yeah,
clear.
no, not him, the anthropologist. So, David Gilmour wrote a book called Manhood in the Making. And what he does is he looks at rites of passage of throughout the world, of the passage from boy to man. So from the passage from girls to women, there is a biological event, which is the arrival of the first menstruation. But the passage from boy to man doesn't have an equivalent of that. So he looked at these rites of passage in many parts of the world, and what he found was that usually what is required of boys to show that they are men to their peers is to either go to the jungle and survive for 3 days and 3 nights, or kill their first wild animal, or in some parts of Mexico, or even the outskirts of Naples, where there's a lot of organized crime, is like your first robbery or your first murder, for example. So in all of these cases, the common thread is that there are two things happening. One is the ability to shut down your empathy valve. And the other thing is that the status of men is something that is social. It is something that is given to you by your peers. Hence, it can be taken away by your peers. So this is different because for women, once you have your menstruation, nobody can take that away from you. And for men, instead, it means walking around in the world fearing that the status that gives you privileges for sure in the world, if you use your hands while you're talking in a way that isn't manly enough, or if you walk with your knees at the wrong angle. I mean, there are very subtle things that can cost you the status, the hard-won status of men before your peers. Of course, this is tied to homophobia, right? Before working on this project, I believed that homophobia only hit gay and trans men, and of course, gay and trans women. But after working on this project, I realized all of the victims that homophobia makes among cis heterosexual men who are so afraid of being mistaken for gay or queer people that they stay away from a huge range of their expression, of their physicality, of their emotion, because they are too afraid to go to certain parts of their hearts or to use their body in certain ways, because they are hardwired with the fear of looking queer.
I just got, I went to an all boys school in Manchester in the 90s. And honestly, gay was the only fucking word we said. Gay, gay, gay. It was everything. And honestly, it felt like life or death to not appear gay. It was that. And it was horrible. It was horrible. I had at a sleepover a penis touching thing with another boy, right? Which happens a lot when I didn't know any girls, right? And I just lived. I was terrified, like from the ages of kind of 14 to just terrified. It made me violent to prove that I wasn't that thing. It just honestly is so damaging. It's so damaging. And I just, I really want something much better for my boys.
You see, there is a passage from the end of elementary school to middle school when boys and girls learn to seek for emotional and physical comfort outside of the relationship with their parents. Now, this is a very delicate passage because you leave the comfort of your family and you start looking out in the world and you start building that alphabet that will give you the possibility to develop a healthy emotional and later sexual life. Okay. Now, in this very delicate passage, girls are accompanied because they do sleepovers, they do each other's hair, they cuddle with each other. So they are accompanied in this, they can find this physical comfort even before being ready for romantic contacts with boys, etc. They find it in each other. Boys are sort of pushed off a cliff because they're like, you cannot, be a mama boy or a papa boy anymore. And you cannot even look for physical comfort in your friends because this is very dangerous territory. So there is a lot of pressure for them to have a romantic relationship well before they're ready for it. So when one of my close friends went to prison and I went to visit him, and he told me that the worst time he had been in prison had been during COVID. For 2 years, he told me, when on Thursday mornings my mom came to visit, I'd put my hand on the glass and I could feel nothing. He said, for 2 years, I have not touched and I have not been touched by anyone. Now, how many men, even outside of prisons, live a version of the same sentence? How many of them have been convinced that they can either get in touch with other human beings during a sexual act, or they have no possibility whatsoever to ask for a cuddle, for a hug? So this is a huge problem, and it creates as much suffering, and I say this as a queer person, as much suffering in LGBTQ people as it does in heterosexual men.
Should we talk about pirates?
Yeah. Let's talk about pirates.
Oh my God. I mean, I'm really, really pleased that we went there. But, it's so true. And also, I work with really young kids, right? I work with primary school kids. And the boy, this is what comes up in Ruth Whitman's book, Boy Mum. The boys need this touch. They need it more. Our development is behind. The 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old boys, they are on each other in a way that the girls aren't. They need it so badly. And then this thing happens where, boom, no, that is not allowed. It's tragic. Yeah. It's tragic. Pirates. Yeah. Okay. Yes. This is a curveball, Francesca. You wrote the book in Italian. Okay.
Yes.
What noise do pirates make in Italian?
They make, no, I think it's the same as in English, R.
So they're still from Cornwall.
We just have a different R. R.
R. Okay, good. That's so good.
Yes.
I want to look into my favorite, the stories. I love them all. The pirates. I mean, also, by the way, in Good Night Stories for Rebel Girls, two pirates, two badass female pirates. I can't believe I didn't know about that. An Irish one and one from Haiti. So cool. So cool. But tell us about the end of the pirate story.
The end of the pirate story is about consent. So there is a lot of talk, of course, about how do we teach boys consent. And I think that the vast majority of the answers that we have provided fail at their job because they are teaching consent while looking at boys as potential suspects. And I don't think we should look at boys, or men for that matter, as if they had to somehow demonstrate to us that they are not potential rapists, or because nobody deserves to be looked at as a suspect. So I wanted to dismantle this theme of consent because I look at consent as a skill. So I wanted to say, okay, if I have to offer boys and girls some sort of a scaffolding to process those feelings that they need in order not to be scared by consent, what would I do? And this is the way I worked. This is why I worked the way I did on the history of pirates. So there is this pirate, and he's competing with a lady pirate. They are rushing to get a. I'm sorry, because I wrote the stories in Italian. Sometimes I mix up the words, but
That's fine.
but they are competing to get to a treasure. Okay. And they are crossing the last river, and all of a sudden, a crocodile bites off the arm of the lady pirate. And the male pirate uses his hook to sew back the arm of the lady pirate. Now, this was important to me because we are looking at a pirate with a hook, using that hook not to attack somebody, but in a gesture of care. As I wrote the book, I realized that we don't see that often. We don't see male characters in cartoons or comic books that are, for example, changing helping somebody recover from a fever, like this pirate does, for example. And while this lady pirate is unconscious for 3 days and 3 nights, the pirate is taking care of her, and he falls in love with her. Now, this is a big taboo because he is falling in love with somebody who is unconscious. Oh my God, what is going on? Is this wrong? No, it's not wrong. It can happen. He wants to kiss her, but, says the story, she cannot say yes or no. So he does the only thing you can do when you want to kiss somebody you cannot say yes or no. He waits. And when she is awake again, the pirate is very embarrassed, telling her that he would like to kiss her. He turns red. And now, again, how many characters have we seen being embarrassed when they have to ask something like that? Very few. We don't portray embarrassment. So why don't people ask for consent? Because they are afraid that they could not stand receiving a no.
They
are afraid of that.
That's terrifying.
Yes, we have not been given representation.
That this is what that's like. You're going to be scared.
You're going to be scared. You're going to be embarrassed. It is going to hurt. But you guess what? You can survive it. This is a common human experience, but we're not used to see male characters in that situation. And seeing male characters in that situation changes everything. I have 5-year-old boys, a 5-year-old boy in particular, that was reading this story with his mom. And the moment that they read that he waited for the kiss, he turned to his mom and he said, "Mom, this means that the prince in Sleeping Beauty made a mistake, right?" And the mom was shocked that at 5 years old, he could make that connection that fast. But, we forget where we derive our ideas of our role in the world. But the stories that we are sponges when we are little kids, then we forget. But those stories live in our actions, in the way we look at the world for a very long time.
I think I hate to spoil this for the listeners, but I think the other big thing about that for me as a man I have a daughter and I have 2 sons, but Ruth's book really inspired me to talk to my sons about consent and about pornography and all those things. And she says no. He wins the treasure. He does all the right things, and the girl says no. And that is huge. We don't see that in stories. And that, again, that rejection, I remember as a kind of young man, it's like, like wooing a girl that just you wanted love so much and doing all the right things. And it's a no. And it is, the bottom falls out of your world. But he survives, and then he goes and gets the treasure, and it's, you know, it's okay. But we don't see that bit of the story. In the story, the winner gets the girl. So what does
And the
that
thing
say?
is,
That means if
yeah,
you don't get the girl, you're a loser. Like, it's
no, yeah. The thing with that is, and I must say that I have an 8-year-old neighbor here in Rome who still has not forgiven me because the girl doesn't say yes. After the pirate saves her, how
the
could
story is
she not say
bullshit.
yes? Yes. and and the reason is that, of course, the pirate did a beautiful thing, saving the life of this woman. And the beautiful thing that he did is a prize in itself. There is no need for the girl to give up on her bodily autonomy for him to be gratified by the beautiful thing that he did. So the thing is, we don't do the right thing because we want a prize. And the prize can never be another person, by the way. So it mattered to me that that was the message that they worked on. And it mattered to me to say that they end up being happily, they stay enemies, and they keep on living their lives and their adventures. And that is a possible end. Not all stories end with an happily ever after. This story, they are happy, they are separate, they live separate lives, and that is a possibility with everything else. And we are not told that story enough to realize that that is part of life.
Talk to me about the blue planet and
Yes.
why you think it's. I mentioned to this before we started recording. You were like, "Oh yeah, that's always a popular one with dads." Why?
It is an interesting story that speaks to grown men. And I think you mentioned that it's a story that dads like. I said to you that grown men like that story.
Right.
And in my experience, it's mainly because it speaks to a relationship that they had or did not have with their own father. So it's a story where, in a world of sharks, having a tenderness with your son is perceived as a vulnerability, something that exposes you to the danger of being hurt or even eaten by other sharks. Still, the dad in the story finds a way to build a tender relationship with his son. And when it comes to there is a meteor that comes to this planet and drags all of the kids in the school, or all of the shark kids, in the bottom in the bottom of the ocean where it's very dark. Nobody wants to be because they are not, all the other sharks and all the other creatures are not used to doing things together. And it's too hard the mission to go on their own in this place that is so dark where nobody can see a thing. But it is because of the love of this father for his son that he manages to convince all of the other creatures of the sea to help him and to go all together to grab all of the kids and bring them back to the above ocean. So it's a story of where the relationship between a father and the son is not a relationship of heroism, because we have seen plenty of movies where, in some cases, these fathers don't have a relationship with their kids until their kids get kidnapped by terrorists. And then they find that they have an arsenal under their bed, and they have only through violence the opportunity to show kids that they love them. And this is a story that turns that stereotype upside down, because this father has shown tenderness and has established a relationship with his son from before the tragedy. And that is what makes them more resilient. So it's not the moment when the tragedy strikes that you can show your kids love. It starts well before that. So that was the reason why
And
I
I
really
thought, you know,
cared.
the beautiful line at the start of that story is it's something like, you know, and the sharks are the most powerful creatures in the ocean, and everyone's scared of the sharks, but it's not great being a shark because the sharks are scared of the other sharks. And I
Yes.
was like, wow, yeah, that is such a great analogy for
Yeah.
masculinity. And then it also, you know, what I love, and this is a common theme in the stories, is there is heroism, but a lot of the time what is heroic is being kind when you're not
Hmm.
really supposed to be. That's a kind of constant thing where it would be much easier to bully or to side with a bunch of people behaving in a negative, and actually the heroes in the story, and in some ways, like the father in that story, he gets angry, right? He you
Mm.
know, there's almost aggression there. You know, he loses his
Yes.
temper with the rest of the creatures, like for not joining in. And then but essentially he has to ask for their help as well. There's no lone wolf stories in all of this. Like, all of these characters would be in a mess if they didn't have other people.
Yes. And when he loses his temper and he says, I will go by myself. So he tries to be a hero. The jellyfish, the great jellyfish comes and is like, nobody can go to the darkest of dark by themselves.
Hmm.
We each need to have another creature besides us. I will tell you this story. My father, who is a 70-year-old man from southern Italy, as a group of friends, a group of friends that is a bit an anomaly because they are like, he has the widower who is like almost 90 years old, and then there is a disabled guy who is 30, and then there is another guy who is divorced by his wife, and then there is another guy. They're all, but besides my father, they all are they don't have a woman in their life. Okay. And this in small towns is hard for men because women have church and they have all of their activities. They do things together more easily. But men, when they are not with women, have a harder time coming together. So it's a bit of an anomaly that my father sort of assembled this group of friends because he's a married man, so he would hang out normally with other married men, and instead he hangs out with these guys. Okay, and one of these guys, a few years ago, when when his girlfriend broke up with him, he went to the RV where this girl had moved with her new boyfriend, and he set the RV on fire. They managed to escape, so he was charged with attempted murder and not with, double murder. And my father told me that he said that if he had the opportunity today, he would do it again. And when my dad told me this, I got incredibly mad at him because I'm out in the world doing all of this work to dismantle the structures of male violence, and you have in your group of friends this guy who's you know he's not a person who says, I paid my debt with justice and now I'm trying to build back a life. He says, I would do it again. And my father looks at me and he goes, this friend of his was an elementary school mate. They were elementary school mates. And he said, you have no idea the life that this guy had. He was the only survivor of 14 kids. And he had his mother with psychiatric problems. Every time she came out of the hospital, her father would get her pregnant. It was a nightmare. He was bullied for his entire life. And you know what the reason is, he told me, if he doesn't do it again today? Because at night, he's not alone. He has us. So we meet each other, and he's with us, and he doesn't do anything stupid. And when he said that, I felt really horrible because in my world of, activists, and there is a lot of preaching of isolating violent men, of, cutting ties with men who may be violent, who may do horrible things, etc. And I realized that when men resort to violence, it's very uncommon that they share with their friends what they are doing. Violence usually is a product of isolation, of profound isolation. There was a boy in Italy, the one that killed Giulia Cecchettin, and they found a list on his iPhone where he listed the items that he would buy on Amazon to kidnap and kill his own girlfriend. He didn't share that list on the soccer chat on WhatsApp. This is a fictional idea that men discuss being violent with their families together. This is a product of isolation. So my invitation to boys and men is actually the opposite of isolation, is don't let anyone go so deep into their isolation that they come up with this sort of evil plans. You are your brother's keepers. So male solidarity can be like being closer to your friends when they break up with their girlfriend, when they're going through a divorce. It can be taking care of each other. It's not just the kind of male solidarity that we see in like covering up for each other. It can be taking care. So I think we need more of this. And we need to sort of escape this idea that we must isolate with them, because that is a way to feel like you don't have anything to do with that it doesn't have anything to do with me. I'm not responsible. But what happens when we actually feel that we do have a responsibility to keep each other from harming other human beings? That changes everything. There is a huge debate where there are two fronts, like the people that say that the men that say not all men, and the women that say all men, right? And in fact, I think that these are two sides of the same coin. The person saying not all men is saying not me. The people saying all men are saying not us. They are both ways of deflecting responsibility. But instead, the kind of work that I am trying to do is what happens if we all feel responsible even in understanding what sorts of dynamics we may participate in that foster culture violence, even when we are unaware of them. Because if it is true, and I believe it is true, that women participated to building the world as it is, we didn't just make the cool parts, we even participated in creating the patriarchal culture. We cannot just take responsibility for the huge scientific discoveries. It doesn't work that way. If we were there and we were just erased from textbooks, we weren't just there for the nice parts. So now the point is, can we sit at a table together, look at each other, look each other in the eyes and saying, how can we change this? This is not working anymore. How can we change this and replace domination with compassion? I care about you. You care about me. Let's try to figure this out. This is what I mean when I talk about looking at gender equality rather than as a battle of women against men, as a journey of mutual liberation.
I don't I don't think I've heard anyone say that before. Any of those things. And I'm read extensively.
Mm.
And I think, I'm reading The Will to Change by Bell Hooks, who is talking about, this liberation of men. There's something in here, right, about, I'm going to say particularly as a man, because of the different socialization, and it's connected to what you were saying about your dad, but constantly trying to move out of an I framework and into a we framework. Like, that isolation, the individualization, the me and my goals and my achievement, and trying to look at myself as constantly as part of some kind of ecosystem and what my job is within that, and it's hard work. It doesn't come naturally to me at all, like that reframing. And I think what's amazing about being a father, which just slickly segues onto your last story, we did it, is the involved fatherhood, putrescence, the changes when we pay attention, when we open to it, they allow us to do that. They make that much easier, which is what your final story is about. It's about the growth of caregiving, right? Tell us about the junk planet.
I don't want to scare parents who may be listening. Of course, kids don't pick this up, but this story is actually about suicide.
Okay.
Which is a huge theme when we talk about men and masculinity. So this is a story about a man who decides to leave his planet with a rocket that is filled with provisions. And when he gets on this faraway little planet where he lives on his own, we meet him at the beginning of the story that all that is left of all of his provisions is a watermelon. And he has disassembled the rocket that took him to that planet because his understanding is that he's never going back. So when his provisions will be finished, he let himself die. That is, the story doesn't say that.
No, it's
but
it's implicit. And I do you know what? I kind of missed it. I missed that.
Yeah,
analogy.
no, it's okay, because it doesn't have to be, that. Of course, kids don't have to go there with their imagination. The story is meant to offer them, without them knowing, a seed that can help them should they feel desperate in the future. It's one of the stories that kids, for example, never ask me to read, because I think much of it flies over their heads because it's a particularly surreal story. Okay, so what happens on this planet is that when this man is, spitting the seeds of the watermelon against his castle of, junk, one day one of the seeds of the watermelon blooms, and he's like, if I get another watermelon, I can last for a few days longer. So he takes care of that little bloom. And when the watermelon becomes big and he's, getting ready to eat it, at one point he sees that the watermelon is moving. And he's like, oh my God, I'm on a, distant planet. For sure, there's a monster is going to come out of this watermelon. And instead, out of the watermelon comes a child. Now, of course, the child is his inner child. He doesn't know who he is. He's like, who are you? But the child doesn't answer. He starts playing. And at one point, they start eating watermelon. They look at each other, and the kid is spitting the seeds of the watermelon, and he hitting the man on the head. And one morning, they wake up, and the kid has built a telescope to show him where he came from. And the man is like, is mad. He's like, why are you showing me that planet? There is nobody waiting for me there. And the child looks at the man and he says, you're not going to let me starve, are you? And the man has planned for himself to starve, but he cannot bring his heart to starve a child. So even though he doesn't want to do it, he builds back the rocket. And when the rocket is finished, they shoot themselves back and they land back on the planet that man had left many years before, thinking that he would never, ever come back to that place where he had suffered so much that he had decided to leave. And the child and the man go back hand in hand to the house where the man had left. And the house is in disarray. They kick down the door, there are pieces of the roof that are missing. And he's like, oh, it's not worth it to repair this thing. We can sleep in the rocket or something. And he sees the child climbing the kitchen and finding a little vase. And he takes out a seed of watermelon from his pocket that is brought from the distant planet. And he says, let me plant this. So when we will have fixed this house, we will have a watermelon to eat together and we'll be happy. And in that moment, the man understands that that is a beautiful plan and that the prospect of eating the watermelon on this renewed porch with this child is a prospect that deserves him to work for it. And it's a moment where he reconnects with his life. So I cared for this story to be the last story in the book because I wanted to leave this seed of watermelon, because men are taught to never look back. This is part of the reason why sometimes for men it's so hard to say sorry. Because in order to say sorry and to mean it, you have to look back at what you did. But as part of the curriculum of masculinity, you are taught to always look forward, one foot in front of the other, never look back.
Keep moving. Yeah.
Because if you stop, or if even worse, if you look back, you may not like what you see. But instead, many times in life, looking back and understanding how you closed doors behind you that weren't meant to be closed, or how your life took turns that didn't take you where you thought you belonged, is important. So I wanted that story to close because the book starts with a liftoff and it finishes with a landing. And part of the mission of this book is, even for boys, to give them a house to come back to. The point of children's stories should always be to experience childhood as a place where you can always come back, rather than a place where you try to escape for the rest of your life. So this is why this story is a story of an homecoming, because being able to come home is crucial for the well-being of all human beings, and it is a skill that is not enough taught, especially to boys and men.
Yeah. And because it's scary sometimes, as you said, he doesn't even want to look down the telescope. Like, it's scary to come home to those moments, and it's scary to deal with your inner child, because sometimes you've made him into a monster. I didn't expect this to be that emotional. It's really taken me by surprise. There's this little quote from Bell Hooks. No significant body of feminist writing addresses boys directly, letting them know how they can construct an identity that is not rooted in sexism. There is no body of feminist children's literature that can serve as an alternative to patriarchal perspectives which abound in the world of children's books. And there is now.
Yes.
You did it.
Yes.
And I hope with all my heart that you do more for us. And I'd love it if you were looking at, ritual, like what replaces this thing that men go out and do, which they can be tested on. What connects us to, in the way that, menstruation connects womanhood with motherhood. What connects men to fatherhood? When can that be our thing? Like, I just, you've been amazing.
I will work on this question of rituals because I've been selected by the Rockefeller Foundation for a Bellagio residency, and I will be there next month in February to work on a book about this research and this work that I've been doing on masculinity, because I believe it's, especially now that there is so many winds of war, in these moments, certain voices about masculinity become louder because projects of war without a certain idea of masculinity reveal themselves in all of their fragile stupidity. And they need a certain idea of male heroism to appear plausible. So I believe that working today on masculinity is also a big investment in world peace.
The books are called Stellar Stories for Boys of the Future and Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls. You can find Francesca on Instagram at Francesca the Rebel. We also mentioned Ruth Whitman's book, Boy Mum, in that episode. Check out my episode with Ruth, episode 6, The Impossible Age of Masculinity. Please subscribe to the podcast and find me on Instagram at Be a Happier Parent.